This is Defender Radio. I'm Michael Howie, and this is Defender Radio, the podcast for wildlife advocates and animal lovers, brought to you by the Fur Bearers. Beavers are incredible animals who have complex social lives, engineer essential ecosystems, and can help us develop climate resilience. In Canada, beavers were nearly wiped out by fur trappers, but their populations slowly returned, though not to their pre-colonization levels. But in Britain, European beavers haven't had the opportunity to return to the landscape, and that's what the Beaver Trust wants to change. A registered charity in England and Wales, Beaver Trust is seeking to restore beavers to their former range in hopes of building climate-resilient landscapes and restoring freshwater habitats. Their multi-tiered strategy includes translocation of beavers into landscapes and implementation of coexistence measures, communicating and educating on the successes of the programs, and to influence government policy to support ecological goals. Dr. Roisin Campbell-Palmer, head of restoration for Beaver Trust, joins Defender Radio to share why returning beavers to Britain matters, what tools and strategies are used to prevent or mitigate negative encounters, and how communication ends up playing a significant role in this scientific journey. Let's get started. I think the sensical place to start, which is now a word, is the natural history of beavers in UK and Ireland, or Western Europe kind of as a whole, because I think the story of beavers there is a bit different than the story of beavers in North America.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're two different species for a start, as you know, but I guess the confusion comes, they look probably identical. I mean, if you saw them next to each other, I think, I would say your ones have like a more paddle-shaped tail. The Eurasian has more kind of straight edges, but you'd be hard-pushed if you saw one from a distance to know what species it was. They do have incredibly similar behavior and, yeah, general ecology. So, but we know that they don't interbreed, so that's why we're kind of very keen that we are only bringing and moving Eurasian back. In some parts of the kind of history going back in beaver restoration, the North American beaver has made it over to Europe and now exists in kind of tens of thousands numbers, decent numbers in parts of Finland and Russia. So we're obviously very keen that they're dealing with the right species. Yeah. And that again goes back a bit to the history where in time there was much more North American beavers left than the Eurasian, so it went down to nearly, well, we're guessing about 1,000 individuals. So this species was almost completely lost. And when certain countries, again, like the northern Scandinavian countries and Russia, wanted to bring back beavers, based on the fur trade, really, it was easier to go to North America and get beavers there. So that's why it's a bit of a checkered history. But, the restoration these days really is focusing on this species. And really, as you mentioned, it's natural history and I guess all the benefits it can bring. It really is an animal that can change landscapes. And I think people are still constantly surprised at what beavers can do in such a little amount of time. So if we're prepared to live with their activities, we are really seeing benefits in terms of things like water quality improvements, storing more water on the land, really renaturalizing rivers, basically. Probably like yourselves, we've got a history of, straightening all our rivers, making them devoid of life and wildlife. And here's a species that comes back and does it. So from a natural history point of view, I guess they're not totally dissimilar. But yeah, their history and their kind of restoration process is different. I think a lot more remained in America, even though it was quite patchy, their distribution. But again, both species have been through huge, maybe like extermination, you could call it, based on the fur trade. And I guess once the Europeans had pretty much decimated the Eurasian beaver, we went over to North America and Canada and started on those populations.
Yep, and it had a very serious impact. I was just looking to try and find the numbers. I couldn't find the exact numbers. I do know that the large or the less conservative population estimates were in the hundreds of millions at the time of colonization. And one anecdote I just came across around Rupert's Bay, they looked over 25,000 square kilometers around Rupert's Bay at one point in the 18th century and found 4 beavers they could pelt.
Wow. Yeah.
which is just, I mean, that entire habitat is beaver. Like that's,
Yeah.
if you look at it
Yeah.
from an evolutionary point of view, that's where they belong. They created all
Yeah.
of that. So it's quite stark. And it was all
Yeah.
for
And back in the
hats.
day, yeah, it would have looked, I mean, I guess now to us, what North America and Canada would have been like before that is probably unrecognizable. And,
Mhm.
Europe's going back, obviously, a few centuries before that, just the expanse of wetlands and, all those ecosystems that are associated with it. As humans, we've been very good at draining that all out and using that land largely for agriculture and development. And I think if we transported ourselves, 500 years back, Europe especially would look a very different place. And
Absolutely.
yeah, this animal has created that kind of landscape. So when we put it back in, I guess people are worried and concerned that, okay, we lost beavers here, we think in Britain about 400 years ago. So that's a big gap in time, and
Yep.
it's outside the living memory of any of us.
Well, and I think an interesting comparison, and I apologize, this just popped into my head and I have no idea. I apologize. I don't know if you have any experience with Canada geese in terms of in population changes, because they're a fascinating example of that, where the geese were effectively wiped out through hunting and various other means, and then sometime later people tried bringing them back as a farmed animal and they got released. But the landscape had changed so drastically that Canada geese just went, oh, cool. We effectively built a city of condos around every waterfront in Ontario for Canada geese by getting rid of all the riparian plant life and stuff like that would keep geese from wanting to be on water. And now municipalities are starting to change all of their ponds and rivers and streams to put tall grasses and reeds and slow shrub and all of that back along that riparian bank, because then the geese don't want to be there. It's that simple.
Right.
They want to be somewhere with low grass where they can easily get in and out of the water. If you get
Easy
rid
life.
of you get rid of that low grass, they don't hang out as much, and then you don't have to deal with the excessive amounts of poop and the really weird fear a lot of people have of Canada geese.
I suppose if you're small, they can be aggressive.
Oh, they're aggressive no matter how big you are.
Yeah, being chased by a goose.
Yeah. Oh, all of us have. I got bit by a goose as a kid.
Oh, wow.
At a restaurant, my dad told me to. I was 5. It's one of my earliest memories. He told me to throw the lemon from my drink to the goose. And it didn't come off my finger. No, it didn't come off my finger. So the goose just came over and took it off my finger. And as a 5-year-old, that was Godzilla just took my hand, Dad. Why are you laughing? For those who don't know, Canada geese have no teeth, so it was not exactly that big of a deal. But they can be exceptionally aggressive in their behavior. It's quite funny, considering that they're geese. But anyway, back to beavers. We were talking just now about riparian landscapes, so the wetlands, bogs, any space around a body of water. And you made the really important point that so much of what had been beaver habitat has been replaced by agriculture. And that is a significant point of conflict now in Canada, and I imagine in the UK and Ireland as well. What kind of work? So I understand that you didn't just go out and drop a bunch of beavers on the sidelines and say, go team, go.
Cool.
In the preparation for bringing the beavers back, I imagine there had to be a great amount of stakeholder conversation, specifically around some of that agriculture, fears of property damage, and changing land use effectively, which is what beavers are great at. How did your team approach that aspect of that consultation and making it inclusive?
Yeah, and I would say this is still ongoing, even though we have beavers back. So I guess the beaver story in Britain, especially in Scotland, I mean, it started a few decades ago. So, there's been a lot of people for, I guess, a long time really interested and keen on bringing this species back. So it's been a big journey. It's been controversial in times because, as you can see, we're an island. So we're not like other parts of Europe that were actively restoring beavers, a few decades before us. Some of those were official, some of those are unofficial. And of course, as beavers expand, they were doing the work themselves and moving into countries. So Britain really was the kind of last, so it's the kind of western extent off the range, but it was really one of the last places to really seriously consider bringing beavers back. And I think because we have an island mentality, if we want to see lost species back, we're going to have to go and intervene. And as soon as you kind of approach that, there's debates on both sides. Is it the right thing to do? Is the landscape still here? As I mentioned, 400 years is a long time. So there was lots of debates about, well, do they even have the habitat anymore? And would it be the right thing to do? It's been a long journey. There was various, I guess, key stages that kind of prompted more action. So when the European directive to encourage member states to just investigate the feasibility of bringing lost species back, of which the beaver was one, it gave emphasis for the different countries. So Scotland, Wales, and England did their own feasibility studies. Now, a lot of that was based on ecology. And, where would you source beavers from, looking at things like disease risk, all this kind of stuff. But a big part of that was the social aspect. So over the years, it's taken lots of different forms. So it's, been from like votes on a national scale to, independent projects investigating social attitudes to not only beavers, other species as well. But the beaver, I guess, has been one of the key species in this. And really trying to look into focus groups. So like we've mentioned, agricultural, but, also kind of we looked at forestry, engaging with the forestry kind of sector, engaging with the fishing sector, trying to bring as many people on board. I guess like a lot of these things, it's about how much people want to engage back. So I would say in some areas there still is opposition. It's a licensed species. So even though it's back, you can't just go around and put it out anywhere. So every time there's a new project or you're putting beavers into a new catchment, that in itself is about a lot of local engagement. And that can be reaching out on a local level, the public meetings, to doing kind of campaigns over the internet, things like that. But also when beavers are on the ground, a lot of our time and our work is really spent engaging with people, either those experiencing conflict or just, education as well. That goes a long way. Like I say, people haven't lived alongside this species. They've probably heard various things about them. So even just having talk and making time to talk to people about what to expect and, what's kind of realistic and what might be a bit more fanciful. So sometimes we're still speaking to people to try and convince them they're not fish eaters, for example. Yeah. So all of that, it's about taking people on a journey. And then if people are experiencing conflict, it's really, well, to me, it's about listening and trying to find resolutions. But again, the beaver is kind of one species in a wider picture of what's going on. So, like we've mentioned, land use changes in general can upset people. This whole idea of, maybe more sensitive farming, I guess people are much more aware these days of how some farming practices might be impacting on the wider climate, our polluted rivers and things like that. So I think the beaver is a perfect species that's kind of opening up these broader conversations, and a lot of it is a focus around the species, but then when you take it wider, it's like, well, people are upset about a whole range of things, and sometimes the beaver's stuck in the middle. So again, it's about open, transparent conversations, I think, and we don't have all the answers, and we don't win everyone over at all. Yeah. But I think it's a direction of travel. They're back, and on the whole, people are very keen to see them back.
Well, and I'm curious, I've been taking some programs in horticulture and land use ecology and stuff like that at a university here. And I am continually surprised by the amount of, for lack of a simple term, social sciences that end up going into restoration projects. As a biologist, was that something, and it's very personal, but was that something you were prepared to do through your education and training, or is that something that you kind of had to learn to do as you started focusing on restoration projects?
That's a great question, because I would say I'm an animal person through and through. It was always my passion, always what I wanted to do. And I find more and more I've ended up in this kind of weird juxtaposition of like, I'm trying to do all the animal work, but a lot of my time is just spent with people. And I would say I'm not a natural kind of people conflict resolution at all, but I think the way I try to handle it is just to kind of, like I say, be open, transparent, but also trying to just bring kind of the facts and realism and let people make up their own mind as well. So, you're not preaching. I don't, no background in social science whatsoever, but yeah, I think you spend a lot of your time doing that.
Yeah, and you're also talking about, people have interest in cleaning water and understanding the impacts of runoff from agriculture and stuff. When we then talk about beavers, we're talking about them in this context in an ecosystem service type of way or a value type of way. Is that something that you have found the public or willing or able to pick up and carry with them, the concept of the broader services as opposed to just what we were all taught in grade school of the food web or food chain, depending on when you were taught. Are they able to take those larger systemic concepts with them, or does that take a little more zhuzhing, for another lack of a better word?
No, that again is a very interesting point. When I first got involved with beavers about 15 years ago, I remember, when we were saying about all the benefits, ecosystem services was one of the lists, that we would just kind of roll out. And I think back then there wasn't a wide understanding, and I probably didn't, realize the true extent of it, of what ecosystem services even were. So it was easy to focus on the biodiversity benefits and all that kind of stuff. I think now there's been a total shift, I think, in the general public's kind of interest levels in climate change, like you say, what's going into their rivers, what's going into their food production. I think people are becoming much more socially aware and questioning, how our land is used. And I think that is now a concept that's much more realized, and you can have really good conversations with people and people get it. And I think once they go to a beaver wetland or see some of the changes they can bring, people can see it and then visualize it and go, actually, this is what it means to clean up a river. I can see dirty water coming in off the fields, going through several dams, and clean water coming out the bottom. So people do get it. Again, you won't win everyone over, and sometimes we do have very difficult conversations with people that look at the animal is very destructive, and it's felling trees. We're all told to plant trees. Why would you bring back an animal that is killing trees? These kind of conversations. Or if they're burrowing through things like flood banks or flood defenses. I mean, that's a really hard concept to then stand and talk about ecosystem services. But I think on the whole, it's definitely language that's been used more and more in a public space. So I think people are getting it. It's easier to talk about.
Well, that's great to hear. I think that's my fear when I try and write about things is, how much of this do I have to explain?
Yeah.
Like if you're reading this from, and I'm doing a lot of it online, not face to face, so I can't gauge reactions. I can't engage with a person. I'm just trying to guess. The majority of readers will understand these concepts, but then I may have to explain that concept or provide a resource if they want to try and understand it better.
I agree. It's still there. I think what the challenge has been is, I mean, we can say, oh, they're good for ecosystems services, or they generate X, Y, and Z. But I think the challenge has been documenting that and proving that, and almost putting it into numbers. And that's very hard to do.
Yes.
So I think, there's still people that are highly skeptical. And I think until we kind of generate some of that data, it's really hard to kind of maybe be taken seriously, or just like, oh, well, you would say that anyway. I think the exciting thing of what's happening at the minute, there's some very good universities, Exeter University, who we work with quite closely, are one really brilliant example that are trying to make this whole ecosystem services concept and, naturalization, flood, restoration, floodplain restoration concepts more accessible. And trying to put some figures on it and document it. And I feel, again, I've seen a change in especially the authority levels. So, when you come with some nice hard science like that, they're really starting to listen. Now that doesn't mean, it's going to be beavers everywhere and everything's fine. But I think there's definitely an argument building for having these and justifying these animals back, not purely on, well, it's a lost species, so ethically we should have it back, or it's a cute mammal, everyone loves it until maybe it turns up in their back garden. These kind of arguments have become, I think, a lot more serious and taken more seriously. So yeah.
That's very cool. And speaking of the science, have you been able to publish anything yet? I mean, how long have we been doing this for? And has there been an opportunity to publish, perhaps, is the better way of phrasing that? Or is it in the process still a lot of data gathering? It's the ADHD. It switches words in my head sometimes. It's really weird.
Don't worry.
Still in that process of a lot of data gathering, which, as you noted, for trying to measure something on an ecosystem level is you got to have everybody on board, and you got to be looking in a big, wide area to try and measure this stuff. Yeah. So have you gotten there yet?
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, we're in some parts we're about 20 years down the line with beavers being present. So there's been, I think, a whole range of publications. Is there one killer paper that documents it all? No. But I mean, we were starting from, and me personally, a species that, I had no concept of, never worked with. We hadn't done things like move them in any numbers or even cared for them in captivity. So my kind of personal passion research objectives were more based around the animal itself. So, looking a lot at the kind of welfare in captivity, the veterinary care of the species. So from that kind of aspect, we started, there's lots now more existing publications on beaver veterinary care, which, was not a big concept before that. But like I say, this has been a journey and many people have kind of been on it at different areas. So, you've got hydrologists, specialists in lichens, dragonflies. Over these years, the pictures are building up, and the vast majority of the publications are positive and are easily accessible or explaining concepts to people. I think a lot of this needs to be tied together. So, like you say, it needs to be bigger scale and kind of win some of the other arguments. And there's still controversy with things like beavers and fish, that we haven't got to the bottom of or kind of convinced everyone. But I would say the science is what's driving it forward in certain sectors, because it's now we can go to people and go, well, hang on, 10 years of monitoring has shown this, and that's really powerful.
Yeah, it's quite interesting how much comes together, how quickly in that way, but at the same time, as you note, it's such a broad concept that it's going to take time to then tie it all together.
Exactly. And what we did find, there was such a wealth of publications in Europe, so it was like, especially in the early days, we'd be like, oh, but in Poland they find this, and in Norway they find this, it's a no-brainer. But it rapidly became very evident that people were like, yes, that's Europe. What about beavers in a British context? So almost the science, got very narrowly focused into beavers in a British context, which I think is fine. It's part of the journey. And to be honest, it's saying a lot of similar things that the Europeans told us a long time ago. But we had to go through that journey, and we still are going through that journey of what do beavers in Britain mean. And that's a social journey, a scientific journey, and obviously the animals themselves. So,
If it helps at all, we will go from town to town at times and hear, oh, well, our beavers are different, and it's 10 kilometers down the road. It's like, okay.
No, I can't cope with that.
But at the same time, you also can't say, well, your experience is wrong, right? They've experienced what they've experienced. They just may not have the context to place that in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what I found also then interesting, looking at the Restoring Beavers to Regenerate Our Landscape. So on the website for Beaver Trust under mission, you've got this great big graphic that shows the process in a very broad way, from translocate beavers into the favorable sites all the way around. So from that point, restore, communicate, and educate, influence. And it's a never-ending cycle, in a sense. But
I don't know if that's a good or bad thing.
But that's also, these are not short-term necessarily things. There's a lot of short-term issues that need to be resolved and confronted, but this is a very, very long-term process. I like thinking about where I live in Hamilton. We're on the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee Iroquois people, and they had a 7th generation principle, which was that every decision we make, we have to, the philosophy that every decision we make, we have to measure the impact 7 generations into the future. So is this going to be sustainable for 7 generations? Are we doing harm to 7 generations? And I feel like that concept is kind of at play here. And it's one of the beautiful ways that traditional ecological knowledge of Indigenous people tie into modern science. Is that same concept of this isn't going to just happen and then be done. It's a long, drawn-out process. What is the long-term goal? What is the ultimate vision for Beaver Trust after all of this has been done for years and years and years?
Well, I think to start with that, I think it's clear, it's a recognition that there's a responsibility when you're bringing back a species. I'm not going to point to other projects. Some projects is a bit, of the glory, isn't it? It's like, oh, we brought it back, right? Job done. And walk away. So you get the kind of the kudos of that. I think this is a recognition that this, like I say, is a landscape changing animal. It's not a matter of, we just put a couple out and job done. It's, there's so many kind of, milestones in that, isn't it? It's about, creating a self-generating healthy population. It's about, taking people on a journey. It's not about kind of getting up and leaving people when they might need the help the most. So for me, to have a few beavers on the landscape might be fine and they might bother nobody. What happens, like you say, 10, 20 years down the line when there's a lot more beavers and then potentially the conflicts kick in? So have we, done a good job? Have we restored a species, or we brought it back and then it starts causing potential kind of havoc halfway down the line? And that's when you need to capture people again, isn't it? Because you could lose all the support, when they're fine and they're, not impacting on anyone. But you see this, and again, the Europeans were very clear to us. There'll be this kind of, almost the glory early days where, people are happy, it's cute, it's all, everyone's singing each other's praises. And then, as beavers build up in the landscape, when they start moving into areas that are potentially less well suited, and causing more conflict just by density and spreading, that's when you can have, people that were on board going, oh, hang on a minute, these animals are awful, because they've come into my backyard and impacted on me. So if you lose people at that point, and the kind of tide of public opinion turns against that species, then you're undoing a lot of hard work, and for what? And you can't, to me, you have to be socially responsible as well and be there for the long term. So what does it look like? I think success to me looks like beavers restored pretty much in all our catchments, a well-resourced management program or mitigation program that is accessible to all and that people have support if they cause conflict. And that was, when I say cause conflict, these are very localized, sources of conflict, but it's very personal to that individual landowner or person that's being affected. I think it's ultimately is people living alongside beavers and then being normalized, and not, still being this new species that someone else dumped on them. It's, that beavers are a normal thing. It's just part of our native wildlife, and not that we don't give them a second thought, but it's they're just there and they're part of it, and we accept them like we do other species. And that to me is what long-term success would look like. And again, that might not mean that we're putting beavers out all the time or all the kind of stuff I love to do, but it might mean, again, education, support, mitigation, awareness raising, that kind of thing. And to me, that's what the Beaver Trust role could change more into and focus, more solely on that in time.
Evolve alongside the ecosystem that you're regenerating. And one of the, speaking of conflict points and things like that, website has a great little section. It's a paragraph that I quite enjoy about beavers and buffers. So the concept of riparian landscapes or lands which are water, or the land around water, the ecosystems around waters, and how if majority of, I think it was in Bavaria, over 90% of beaver conflicts occur within 10 meters of the water, while 95% occur within 20 meters of water. So that's pretty close. And that goes in a lot too with the concerns about trees coming down and things like that. And I'm very excited by the solution to that. But I thought, could you share a bit about that? So this is something that comes up all the time in urban areas, rural areas in North America, is beavers ate the trees, or they're doing this. We need to get rid of the beavers to protect the trees. How does that then sort of play out according to this concept?
Well, I think again we're trying to encourage people to think about their landscapes and riparian habitats more holistically, and it's not just trees, water. It's there's a whole you say interface there. So it's a lot of our waterways unfortunately are to me they're quite barren. You've got a few mature trees, you've got manicured grass landscapes, and if we look back, it's like this is not what woodland looks like, and I think a lot of people have this misconception of what kind of natural woodland is. It is trees falling over. It is, all different plants and range of species in there. It is trees of different shapes and sizes. So I think it's about trying to restore, not just the species, but also the habitat the species should be in. And, I guess what we're trying to say, one of the easiest solutions to reduce beaver conflict is to let our banks renaturalize. Now, that might be planting trees. It might just let it scrub over. That in itself, it does. We know the species stays very close to the waterline. So if we provide it with more food in there, not only will it kind of reduce beaver conflicts, but, all these other kind of concerns we're thinking about, like agricultural runoff, runoff from the roads, other, again, wildlife as well that has, the homes are lacking. That this naturalized system could really not only benefit beaver mitigation and management, but also, have a whole host of knock-on effects, but also, ultimately just asking people to look at their landscapes and how they're used and think about them differently as well.
Yeah, it's a big
That's
challenge.
not to say if they want to protect a tree, they can protect a tree, but again, so how many trees are we going to protect? And maybe if that tree falls over and you're left with a big empty space, then to me, what was your plan? Where was the regeneration of trees anyway? So it's hopefully trying to ask people to look at things a bit differently.
I have found it's required a shift in perception for myself in conversations about this, whether it's for research stuff or an interview like this. And it's very much, again, thinking of, but more or less what you just said. It's okay, well, this isn't forever. This isn't static. None of this is static. It's all constantly changing. And the best we can do is guide how that change happens. And I think you raised that great point then of, okay, well, that tree wasn't going to live forever. It could have been hit by lightning. It could have just gotten rot. There's 1,000 different pests that could have gotten to it. What were you going to do when it came down anyway? Again, for me, that's the exciting time is, okay, well, what are we going to grow now? I love growing things. I think it's incredible to watch happen. So yeah, if a bunny comes by and eats a bunch of my plants, it's an excuse to go to the greenhouse and nursery. But it's also then, okay, well, how am I planting? Am I planting in a way that encourages the bunny to come over? Or am I planting in a way that allows the bunny to be a bunny and I have raised beds for my veggies. Problem resolved. The squirrels are a different issue, but
they're relentless.
Yeah,
I think it's also we're trying to explain to people a beaver felled tree doesn't equal tree death as well. And I think people are horrified it can be sad when big mature trees go down. But yeah, you hit it on the head. It's like, trees do die, or, they regenerate. And it's this dynamic process, which is, really good for biodiversity. And I guess we've all got shifting baselines of how our rivers should look or used to look. I think people are just forgetting that rivers are messy, ponds are messy, and this is good for nature.
Yeah, it's funny when you look at the history of landscape design and stuff, and you start looking at post-industrial revolution getting into the naturalized views. But even those in the formal gardens was very meticulously set up. So if there was a fallen tree, it was a fallen tree brought in from somewhere and laid out with the exact angle for the most aesthetic. Come on, good effort, team. Good effort. Kind of missed the point. And talking about tree wrapping, though, so what is your success rate, or what is your not success rate, I guess, but what has your experience been tree wrapping and everything as a mitigation measure?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to brag, but I think quite good. Again, it's a technique. We've looked at manuals from America and Europe, but it's something you do. The more you do it, the more you kind of refine it. So if we ask people to be selective as well, but if there really is important trees and people are allowed their favorite tree, that's no problem. we're using mesh guards, and we've played around a lot with, specs of that. So that to me works quite well. You do have to keep on top of it, check it every once in a while and maybe move it around. So I think that's quite easy. That's one of the easier mitigations of all of them, I think. But again, to me, I'm starting to question myself now. Is like, I could say, well, how many trees do we protect? And just because we can protect them, should we always be protecting them? So this is a more kind of debate I'm having with myself. But I think tree wrapping, if it's done well with the right specs, is a good long-term and I think accessible and cheap solution. Now, would you do it en masse? Maybe not, but it's being selective.
And I think if you're looking at doing it en masse, you then need to go back to question one of why. What are we trying to achieve, and what are we trying to protect, prevent, restore, whatever? And it's that, how is this affecting everything else? If we let these 4 trees become part of the ecosystem in a new way, will it allow for a new growth? And will it allow for, a change? Maybe it'll help develop a meadow because the sunlight will, there's so many weird little things that can happen when you remove something. Or allow
so we've been much more excited recently about looking at riparian planting schemes, because people will do it, and now beavers are in the mix, but trying to speak to like forestry managers and advisors and things like that. It's like, well, just like what you said, let's look at what species you're putting in there. Let's look at the density. Do we have, or could we have almost like a willow layer, like I don't want to call it sacrificial layer, but you know what I mean. The planting.
The Judas trees.
I won't say, tempting to put these first and see what happens. But it's not to say they won't come up and eat any of the other trees behind. But if we're planting in a way that allows for beaver foraging as well, I think that over a long term is not much more sustainable, but also, provides, like you say, all these interesting kind of habitats and room for dynamic changes. But I think it's a message, isn't it? It's like, we can't exclude beavers, or you could go and spend a lot of time and money on fences and trying to exclude beavers. But why not have the, other biodiversity benefits of maybe trying to include them in your riparian design and play about with tree densities and species. Now, you can imagine some people think that's absolutely bonkers and you're just planting more beaver food. But, it is, I think it's definitely a concept that we're trying to push more now. And I would say, in the earlier days, like I say, we were running around wrapping trees like mad because it was a quick fix and it worked. Now we're just thinking a lot more about what advice we're giving out.
Excellent. And I also want to ask about flow devices. So this is something that the Fur Bearers does a lot of advocacy for. We have a scholarship to the Beaver Institute where we try and help people learn how to build these devices, as well as learn about hydrology, beaver biology, and all of the other elements of it. And we're always pushing municipalities to learn these skills as well. What has your experience with flow devices been?
Yeah, well, I actually went out to America years ago and worked with a couple of your colleagues to put in flow devices and learn more about them. Yeah, so we have put in, I guess, not to the same extent, but we have put in a few. I think we bought into more different, I guess, permissions than you guys do, and I think it's just very different landscapes. So they've worked very well in certain circumstances. Will they be as widely used? I'm not so sure. There's a bit of controversy about, do they then stop fish passage? And so this is the stage we're at. We're at the early days of trying to really get people to accept them as a mitigation tool. And obviously only under use in the right circumstances. What we found in very, very flat agricultural landscapes with low gradient, we just don't even put them in because you put one in and then the beaver goes, well, thanks very much, I'm putting the dam in 10 meters downstream. So we've just kind of totally excluded them from places like that. But in systems with a bit of gradient, especially in towns, where people are kind of well, people are in the mix, and they obviously don't want to see beavers removed, but they don't want their gardens flooded. So it's places like this, I think they can have a much more widespread use and a more successful use. I think there's a general nervousness sometimes, and that is a kind of cultural history of putting anything in the watercourse.
Yep.
Because people see it as a blockage, and then the risk factor of you have conversations around, well, what if it slips? What if it goes and blocks somewhere else? So I guess these are the stages we're at, trying to have these conversations and really kind of demonstrate that they can work well in certain circumstances.
Yeah, and the more it gets done, the more information we get.
Exactly.
And I think the fish questions are very important questions. The website notes there are fish-friendly flow devices that have been trialed in the U.S. We've heard about some of them being used up here. I've also seen them designed to have turtle passages and things like that.
Yes, I've seen the turtle passes,
which was fun.
Not something we have to worry about here, but that was a lot of fun. Yeah.
And I think too, we also see the need a lot in culverts here. So our municipal sewage systems are designed to funnel water very specifically into culverts. And then beavers go, hey, great, that's a perfect spot because of the running water. And when you put in a properly built flow device that can last a decade, okay, beaver moves on, we move on, and you just have to go by every now and then and make sure it's all right, which is a lot more
I
cost
100%
efficient.
agree.
Yeah,
a lot more cost efficient. And I think this is, we've been really looking at you guys and just saying, look, we know this works. We know this is, it's much more widespread in North America. So I think to get over the kind of nervousness of it, we'd love to show that more and demonstrate and just have a more, again, it's about normalizing it, isn't it? Yeah.
It's interesting. It keeps coming back to people. And isn't that just, as you note, as a biologist, it's sort of it's got to be a funny talking to your younger self and saying, so great job with all of the animal stuff. You're going to be mostly dealing with people now. Yeah.
I think I would have said, absolutely no way. I'm sticking to the animal.
And I guess the question to wrap with is, how are people able to support this kind of work? Because I think that's something folks forget is this work doesn't just happen. It takes a lot of dedicated individuals like yourself. The organization has a board of directors and funding partners, and all kinds of other elements go into it the work can happen. So what are ways folks in the UK and Northern Ireland or the rest of the world can get behind Beaver Trust in this project?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about, I guess, helping us to disseminate information about this species first and foremost. I think it's about sharing experiences. If people are living alongside, again, it's normalizing the process. So let's have more talk and communication about that and hear different experiences and hear what's working and what's not working. I'm also always interested in hearing people's fears. And if there's ways, we can open this up to a broader audience and kind of reassure people as well. Yeah. It's not just us one organization in Britain saying this. There's a whole world and wealth of experience as well. Yeah, to me, that's really important. I mean, fundamentally, we're a charity, so we're always looking for support. But also, do look at some of our projects. We work up and down the country. So if there's things local to you, or if you're interested in beaver projects, please do get in contact. There's more wild releases happening in Scotland. In England, it's a slightly different situation where, wild releases aren't allowed yet, but that's something we're working towards. And again, if people are passionate about this, please do write to your MPs, do write to your politicians, do put pressure on the authorities to say, look, this is a species that we want back. And, just really send that message, because I think it's often easier to hear the more negative, cautious voices in this picture. And sometimes those people shout very loudly. And I'm not saying that it's going to be problem-free, but if you're having positive experiences or just want to support the species, then do be vocal about it.
I'd like to thank Dr. Campbell Palmer for her time and encourage everyone to check out the incredible work Beaver Trust is doing. If you'd like to learn more, you can find them online at beavertrust.org or by following the links in this week's show notes. You can follow the Fur Bears for more updates on podcast episodes, campaign details, and how you can make a difference for wildlife in your community. Find us on Instagram and Twitter at Fur Bears and on Facebook under Fur Free. Until next time, I'm Michael Howie for Defender Radio and the Fur Bearers, reminding you to stay informed and stay strong.